She was abandoned on a blind date with no money. The Mafia boss sitting close couldn't look away. The Velvet Anchor was not a place for the faint of heart or light of wallet. It was a cavern of polished mahogany, brass fittings, and low, expensive lighting, designed so that every patron felt simultaneously on display and shrouded in conspiracy. Its curved, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a $10 million view of Port Dominion's working harbor, where container ships moved like slumbering giants in the twilight. It was, as the app profile had promised, the definition of upscale, and Lena Park was being slowly suffocated by it. At 27, Lena navigated the daily chaos of the Port Dominion Bay Hospital ER. She understood panic, trauma, and the sharp metallic smell of fear. But this was a different kind of anxiety. This was the quiet, creeping humiliation of being poor in a rich place. The man, Harbor Gent, was 45 minutes late. His icon on the dating app remained a flat, silent gray. The date was a bust. That realization settled in just as the waiter, a man with a professionally neutral face that had grown steadily cooler, placed the check discreetly on her small table. Lena had only ordered a single appetizer, some kind of deconstructed shrimp toast, and 2 artisanal mocktails. Her eyes scanned the total, $42.50. A hot flush crawled up her neck. She opened her wallet, already knowing the contents. $11. That was it. The rest, every spare cent she had gone to her younger brother Noah's community college tuition that morning. The waiter did not move. He was practicing the subtle art of polite pressure, his gaze fixed just over her shoulder, yet intensely aware of her stillness. Across the room, the manager, a woman in a severe black dress, glanced their way. Her look was sharp, evaluative. This was not a place where one arranged a payment plan. This was a place where one paid, or one was removed. Lena felt the eyes of the surrounding tables, the soft murmur of conversation seeming to dip as she sat frozen. In the elevated VIP section, angled perfectly toward the main entrance and the sprawling windows. Renzo Martelli watched. He sat with the kind of profound stillness that commands a room more than noise ever could. He was in his early 30s, Italian-American, wearing a dark, minimalist suit that whispered its expense rather than shouting it. 2 men sat with him, dressed similarly, drinking whiskey and looking bored, playing their roles as associates perfectly. They were not associates. They were his protection. Renzo was waiting for a business contact, a sensitive meeting regarding new shipping routes. His partner was late, which annoyed him. He scanned the lounge out of habit, cataloging exits, threats, and assets. His eyes landed on the woman at the small table. He had noticed her when she came in, mostly because she was alone and seemed out of place, but also because she was not doing what every other woman in the room was doing. She was not taking selfies, not adjusting her makeup in a compact, not laughing too loudly. She was just sitting, watching the harbor, her posture straight, trying to hold on to her dignity. And then, most importantly, her small table was positioned in a way that perfectly, almost comically, blocked the line of sight from a booth near the bar. In that booth sat 3 men from a rival faction he specifically did not want to acknowledge tonight. They could not see him clearly as long as she was sitting right where she was. He watched the waiter approach her, saw the check, and recognized the precise moment the woman's composure cracked. He saw the flicker of panic in her eyes, the tightening of her jaw as she stared at the bill, the slight tremor in her hand as it hovered over her wallet. He saw the manager begin to move from her station. The timing was perfect, just as the waiter cleared his throat to speak, to begin the quiet, awful process of her eviction. Renzo stood. He moved with a fluid, unhurried grace, crossing the lounge in a few long strides. He stopped at her table, sliding a hand into his pocket. He smiled at her, a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice a low baritone that cut through her panic. "Got held up at the docks." Lena stared, completely bewildered. Renzo did not look at her. He looked at the waiter. "Let me get her check. And mine." He pulled out a thick black metal credit card and handed it over without looking. "And add a round for my table over there." The waiter, recognizing the card, snapped to attention. "Right away, Mr. Martelli." The manager, who had been approaching, stopped dead. Her entire demeanor shifted, melting from predatory ice to obsequious warmth. "Mr. Martelli, a pleasure." "Is everything to your satisfaction?" "It is now," Renzo said, dismissing her. He finally looked down at Lena. The entire lounge had registered the interaction, marked him as her savior, and immediately lost interest, turning back to their own expensive drinks. The crisis was over. Lena swallowed, her throat dry. "I don't know you." He leaned in slightly, close enough for her to smell the clean, sharp scent of expensive cologne and wool. "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You need a way out of a bad spot tonight, and I need someone to sit with for the next 30 minutes so that table by the bar doesn't get suspicious. A fair trade." She looked from him to the manager, who was now smiling at her. She looked at the $11 in her wallet. She had no choice. It was this, or it was washing dishes, or it was the police. "Okay," she said, her voice small. "Good." Renzo offered a hand, but not to help her up. He gestured toward his VIP table by the window. "Join me." "The view is better." She stood, gathering her small purse, and walked with him. It felt like walking through water, her body stiff with adrenaline and suspicion. He seated her in the chair facing the harbor, his back to the room, and slid back into his own. His two men nodded at her once, then returned to their drinks, completely ignoring her. Renzo was, she had to admit, reassuring. He did not pry, did not ask why she was on a bad date, did not make a single flirtatious comment. He asked her what she thought of the new harbor expansion. He asked her opinion on the city council. He spoke like a man conducting a very calm, very low-stakes interview. As she began to relax, just slightly, she took a sip of the water he had ordered for her. Her eyes drifted to the man sitting to Renzo's right. He was staring at the entrance, but his hand was resting on the table. The cuff of his expensive white shirt was immaculate, except for one small, dark, reddish-brown stain just near the stitching. Lena had spent 5 years in an ER. She knew the color and texture of dried blood when she saw it. Her heart, which had just started to slow down, began to pound all over again. This man was no ordinary businessman, and this was no ordinary rescue. The heavy silence at the VIP table was broken only by the distant clink of glasses. Lena kept her hands clasped in her lap, acutely aware of the dried blood on the bodyguard's cuff. It was a small detail, but in her world, small details were the difference between life and death. Renzo leaned back, sipping a dark liquor. He seemed completely at ease, as if he had not just inserted himself into her life. "So, what does a person in your line of work do?" Lena asked, trying to steer the conversation, to regain some semblance of control. "Private marine logistics," Renzo answered smoothly. "I help people move valuable things from one part of the harbor to another, securely." It was a perfect non-answer. It sounded legitimate, expensive, and utterly vague. In reality, it was the truth. As head of the Meridian outfit, Renzo Martelli controlled the docks, the unions, the containers, and the quiet, gray market cargo that the official manifests never saw. He turned his gaze on her, and it was not flirtatious, it was evaluative. "An emergency room nurse," he stated. "That must be difficult." "It's a job," Lena said, her shoulders straightening. "I doubt that." His eyes were dark, and they held hers. "What do you do when you have 2 critical patients, both needing immediate attention, and only one of you?" The question was specific, tactical. He was not making small talk. He was testing her. "You triage," she said simply. "You assess who is most viable, who is in the most immediate danger, and you make a choice. You cannot freeze. And the families, you handle them after, you do the work first." Renzo nodded slowly, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. He had expected a civilian to be flustered. She was not. "It must pay well, at least," he offered. Lena gave a short, bitter laugh. "Not well enough." She stopped, wondering why she was telling this stranger anything. But the stress of the evening, the humiliation, and now this bizarre rescue had worn her down. My mom passed away 2 years ago. The hospital bills she left behind. Let's just say I'll be paying them off for a long time. Add to that night shifts that mess with your head and a younger brother to support. A brother, he prompted, his tone still mild. Noah, he's 19. Smart. Too smart for his own good. He's at Port Dominion Community College. He got into some trouble last year. Hacking the school's grading server, nothing malicious. He just wanted to prove he could. He's on probation. She confessed this all in a rush, a verbal offload. Renzo processed every word. She was not a woman looking for a benefactor. She was a woman holding her world together with tape and string. She was resilient. She had medical skills. She knew how to keep calm under pressure, and she had a clear vulnerability. She was, he realized, far more interesting than just a convenient blind, as if summoned by the shift in tension. The front doors of the Velvet Anchor opened again. 3 men entered. They were not dressed in expensive suits like Renzo. They wore leather jackets, their builds heavy, their eyes scanning the room with obvious, predatory intent. They were the business he had been waiting for. They spotted Renzo's table. One of them began to move forward. Renzo, without looking at them, leaned in slightly toward Lena. He lowered his voice, forcing her to lean in as well. The posture looked intimate. Tell me about the last person who tried to thank you with a box of chocolates at the hospital. The approaching man stopped. He saw his target. Renzo Martelli, leaning in close, whispering to a woman. This was not a business meeting. This was a date. The man grunted, turned back to his companions, and they took a table at the far side of the bar, their eyes still locked on Renzo. They would wait. Renzo relaxed, leaning back. He took another sip of his drink. He inclined his head toward Lena, his voice a low rumble. You just helped me avoid a very unpleasant conversation. Lena's ER-trained senses put it all together. The bloodstain, the logistics job, the sudden appearance of those men, the way they backed off when they saw her. She was not just a shield, she was an alibi. And you just saved me from washing dishes for the next 6 months, she countered, her voice just as quiet. We're even. A genuine smile touched Renzo's lips this time. Even. They sat for another 10 minutes, the silence stretching, before Renzo placed his napkin on the table. It's late. I should let you get home. He stood, and she stood with him. His men were already on their feet, one moving to the exit, the other settling the bill. As they walked toward the door, Lena stopped him just out of earshot of the lingering patrons. Listen, she said, hating this but needing to say it. I can't pay you back for the bill. Not right away, but I will. If you give me a... Renzo waved a hand, dismissing the thought instantly. Forget the bill. Consider it my compensation to you for that guy being foolish enough to stand you up. He looked at her, his gaze intense. Port Dominion is a small town. Lena Park. Maybe I'll see you around. He had not asked for her name. She realized it must have been on the reservation. As she turned to leave, she felt a slight bump, his arm brushing her side. My apologies, he said, steadying her for just a second by her arm. She nodded, flustered, and hurried out the door into the cool, salty night air. Lena did not see Renzo pause in the entryway. She did not see him lift his phone, where his thumb had swiped across the screen, capturing a perfect high-resolution image. He had bumped her precisely to angle his phone's camera at the hospital ID badge, still clipped to the strap of her purse. She walked the blocks to her car, her mind reeling. She felt like she had just walked out of a movie. The man was strange, powerful, and probably dangerous, but he had been, in his own way, kind. She filed him under wealthy Port Dominion eccentric and drove home, locking her doors. She did not notice the dark sedan that pulled out 3 cars behind her, its headlights off. It followed her all the way to her small apartment building, watched her go inside, and then stayed, parked across the street. Renzo's man reported back she was home, alone. The verification had begun. In another part of the city, in a windowless room bathed in the blue light of monitors, the Federal Crime Suppression Unit was running its nightly review. An analyst flagged a security feed image from the Velvet Anchor. "Agent Decker," the analyst called out. "You should see this." Miles Decker, a man whose sharp suit and sharper eyes had seen too much, walked over. On the screen, frozen in time, was Renzo Martelli, and sitting with him, looking far too innocent for the company she was keeping, was an unknown woman. "Well, well," Decker murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "Who's this? Run facial recognition. Find out who Renzo Martelli's new friend is." The double doors of the Dominion Bay ER slammed open, the sound lost in the usual nightly cacophony of beeps and shouts. "Incoming trauma, unknown etiology," a paramedic yelled. Lena Park, running on caffeine and 6 hours of broken sleep, grabbed a pair of gloves and met the gurney. "What do we have?" A man was on the gurney, his face pale, sweating through an expensive black suit. Another man, also in a suit, walked beside the gurney, his hand clamped on the patient's shoulder, his expression grim. "He fell," the second man said, his voice flat and urgent. "Onto some rebar. We need a private room. Our personal physician is on the way." Lena ignored him, her eyes on the patient. She took her shears and cut the suit jacket and shirt away. "Fell," she muttered. The man on the gurney looked up, his eyes hazy with pain, and she froze. It was him, the bodyguard from the Velvet Anchor, the one with the dried blood on his cuff. Her training took over. She assessed the wound. It was a ragged, deep puncture in the left deltoid, bleeding heavily. But it was not a rebar wound. It was too clean on entry, too small. She'd seen this 100 times. She knew a gunshot when she saw one. "This needs a report," the junior resident beside her said, already reaching for the police line. "Not yet," Lena snapped, her authority cutting through. The standing bodyguard's eyes locked onto hers. His hand had moved inside his jacket. It was not a request. It was a silent, lethal promise of trouble if she made that call. "He's unstable." Lena lied, her voice pure ER command. "He needs stabilization before we call anyone." She looked at the junior resident. "Get me 2 large-bore IVs, Oneg, and a pressure dressing. Now." She turned back to the bodyguard. "You want him to live. Get out of my trauma bay." To her surprise, the man assessed her for 1 second, then nodded curtly and stepped back, pulling out his phone. Lena worked with practiced, rapid efficiency. She deliberately charted the injury as a severe puncture wound with embedded foreign material, avoiding the specific letters GSW, which would have triggered an automatic lockdown and swarmed the bay with police. It was a lie of omission, a violation of protocol, but she knew, instinctively, that the alternative was a violent confrontation in her ER. She stabilized him, packed the wound, and got him transferred to a private surgical bay, all in under 10 minutes. It was 3 a.m. when her shift finally ended. The air outside was damp and cold, smelling of the harbor salt. Lena walked toward her beat-up sedan in the employee parking lot, her shoulders aching. She stopped. Her keys halfway to the lock, a long, black sedan, far too expensive for this lot, was parked under a flickering orange lamp. A figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Renzo Martelli. He was not the polished gentleman from the lounge. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loosened. The man who had been shot was nowhere to be seen. But the other bodyguard stood near the car's fender, a silent sentinel. The air around Renzo was different, colder, heavier. This was not a rescue. This was a summons. "You saved my man's life," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried in the empty lot. "He would have bled out if you'd waited for the police. I noticed." He stepped forward, holding out a thick 9x12 manila envelope. It was bulging. "This is for your trouble," he said, "and for the bill the other night. You earned it." Lena flinched as if the envelope were hot. "No." Renzo paused, his hand still extended. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm a nurse. I was doing my job. I don't want any part of this, of men getting shot and lying about it." Renzo studied her for a long moment. He did not look angry. He looked impressed. Slowly, he lowered his arm, pulling the envelope back. "All right," he said. "No money." He took a step closer, and Lena had to fight the urge to step back. "But you have a problem. Lena Park, you were seen with me, and now you've treated one of my men. People might start to think you're involved." He tilted his head. "People who don't care about hospital protocol." Her blood ran cold. "Your brother," Renzo continued, his voice dropping to a soft, almost intimate tone. "Noah. He's still on probation, isn't he? For that little computer mishap? It would be a shame if a misunderstanding complicated that for him. Probation officers can be very sensitive to a person's associates." Lena stopped breathing. It was a threat, wrapped in silk. "I can make sure," Renzo said, "that nobody bothers him, that nobody looks too closely at his files. I can make sure he's safe. All you have to do is continue to be good at your job." He did not need to elaborate. He meant his job. "I have to go," she whispered, yanking her car door open. "Think about it," Renzo said to her back. He did not move until her taillights disappeared from the lot, across the street, parked in the shadows of a defunct laundromat. Agent Miles Decker lowered a high-magnification camera. He had a perfect shot of Lena and Renzo, the thick envelope, the refusal, the intense, close-quarters conversation. "She's in," Decker said to the empty car. "She's not just a date. She's a new asset. She's our side door." When Lena got home, she found Noah awake, playing a game. She told him everything. His face went white. "Lena." "No," Noah said, standing up, his voice cracking. "This isn't just some rich guy. That's Meridian Outfit. That's Renzo Martelli. They run the docks. People disappear. You have to stay away from him. He's threatening you." "Noah," she said, her voice hollow. "Then we go to the police." "And say what?" Lena shot back, the adrenaline finally crashing. "That he offered to protect you, that he paid my bill." She sank onto the couch, rubbing her temples. She remembered the controlled power in the lounge. He was dangerous. Yes, but he had been precise. He had not been crude or sloppy. He was the opposite of the chaos she dealt with every night. In the penthouse of the Mariner Tower, Renzo Martelli looked out over the harbor he owned. His top lieutenants were assembled. "There's a new rule," Renzo said, his voice quiet. "There is an ER nurse at Dominion Bay. Her name is Lena Park. She is a friend of the organization. She's not to be touched. She's not to be followed. She's not to be approached. Her brother, Noah Park, is also off limits. They are my concern now. No one goes near them." "Understood." The men nodded. The order was absolute. The accidental meeting at the bar had ended. The connection, forged in blood, money, and mutual need, was now set. Renzo had found something he did not know. He was looking for a medical professional who was not part of his world, who knew how to keep a secret, and who, he suspected, was too resilient to break. Renzo called her just after 10 at night. He did not ask if she was free. He simply told her he was sending a car. The request was strange. He wanted her to see something. The car bypassed the glittering high-rises of his public life and headed straight for the industrial gloom of the shipyards. Lena's unease grew with every clanging noise and dark, water-stained alley they passed. The vehicle stopped before a modest 2-story brick building. A simple, unlit sign read, "Harbor Line Wellness Program." It looked like a dozen other underfunded community charities. But when Renzo met her at the door, she knew this was just another layer of his disguise. Inside, it was a functioning, if Spartan, medical clinic. A man in scrubs nodded at Renzo, his eyes sliding to Lena with wary curiosity. Lena recognized him, Nurse Alessi, a surgeon who had lost his license 2 years prior for performing procedures off the books. "What is this, Renzo?" she asked, her voice low, the professional offense rising in her. "This is illegal. That man shouldn't be practicing." "He's the best trauma surgeon I know," Renzo said flatly, ignoring her objection. He led her past a small waiting area, toward a curtained-off bay. "We handle our own—" "Your own, you mean your men. This is a private hospital for your gang." She stopped, crossing her arms. "I can't be part of this. This is a violation of every oath I've ever taken." "Look closer," he commanded. He pulled back one of the curtains. An older man, his skin weathered by the sun, lay on a cot. His hand was wrapped in thick, clean bandages, but the smell of antiseptic couldn't hide the underlying metallic tang of blood. He was clearly a dock worker. In the next bed, a young woman coughed, a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. She looked exhausted and scared. "They're not my men," Renzo said, his voice dropping. "They're longshoremen, immigrants, people without papers, without insurance. The man with the hand." A container slipped. If he goes to a real hospital, he's treated, and then he's deported. The girl has pneumonia. She's been working double shifts, cleaning the offices and sleeping in a storage unit. Lena stared. Her indignation silenced. She understood the grim calculation immediately. If she reported this place, if she had Alessi arrested, she wouldn't just be stopping Renzo's criminal enterprise. She would be ripping away the only medical care these people had. She would be sending them back to the shadows, to die of infections or treat crushed limbs with whiskey and rags. Renzo watched her face, seeing the conflict yield to a reluctant understanding. "Come," he said. "There's something else." He led her through a back door to a freight elevator, which rumbled slowly upwards. The doors opened not into a room, but onto the flat, gravel-covered roof. The change was breathtaking. The cramped, hidden clinic below gave way to an endless expanse. The entire port of Astiara spread out before them, a universe of glittering lights, towering cranes moving like silent giants, and the dark, immense shape of the sea. The air was cold, thick with the smell of salt and diesel. It was a stark contrast to the velvet-draped luxury of the lounge where they first met. This was not his performance. This was his territory. They stood in silence for a long time, watching a massive container ship being loaded far below. "My mother died," Renzo said suddenly, his voice quiet against the industrial hum. "When I was 15, she had a lung sickness. We were poor. Not just can't afford vacation poor, but choose between medicine and rent poor. She kept working, scrubbing floors in buildings like this one, until she couldn't stand." Lena turned to look at him. His profile was hard against the city lights, his jaw tight. "We took her to the public hospital. They put her in a ward with 20 other people. She was scared. She hated the smell. She died there, surrounded by strangers." He paused, his throat working. "I started this program because my people, the people from these docks, the ones nobody sees, they shouldn't have to die afraid, just because they can't pay. They shouldn't have to choose between their life and their home." Lena felt an unexpected ache in her chest. For the first time, she saw past the cold authority, past the dangerous reputation. Beneath the armor was a man defined by a profound, unresolved loss. It was a vulnerability that resonated with her own, the quiet fear she knew of being powerless against systems larger than herself. A sharp gust of wind swept across the roof, whipping her hair across her face and making her shiver violently. Before she could react, Renzo was shrugging out of his heavy wool overcoat. He didn't just hand it to her, he stepped into her space, his body blocking the wind, and settled the coat over her shoulders. The fabric was incredibly warm, carrying his scent, expensive cologne, clean linen, and the faint, masculine trace of him. His hands rested on her shoulders, his fingers firm. He did not move away. The moment stretched, his touch lingering far longer than necessary. Lena's heart began to hammer against her ribs, a slow, heavy beat. She looked up at him. His eyes were dark, fixed on her mouth. He leaned in. It was impossibly slow, giving her every chance to turn away, to protest. She didn't. His lips touched hers. It wasn't the bruising, possessive kiss she might have expected from a man like him. It was a question. It was firm, warm, and startlingly gentle. He tasted of the expensive whiskey she knew he favored, and the salty night air. A small, involuntary tremor ran through her. His left hand moved from her shoulder, sliding up to cup the nape of her neck, his thumb tracing the sensitive skin just below her ear. She let out a shaky breath, and her hands, acting of their own accord, came up to rest on his chest. She could feel the solid, unyielding muscle through the fine knit of his sweater. She kissed him back, a hesitant answer that grew in certainty. His other hand found her waist, gripping her, pulling her flush against the hard lines of his body. Still, his touch was restrained. respectful. The kiss deepened. Moving from a test to a statement, it was slow, thorough, as if he were memorizing her. He backed her against the cold glass partition that ringed the rooftop, caging her between his body and the open night. The atmosphere crackled, the air growing thick and hot despite the cold. His breath was warm against her cheek, his grip on her waist tightening, the first sign that his formidable control was fraying. The world had narrowed to the sound of the wind, the pressure of his mouth, and the solid wall of his chest. Then, a sound split the night, a flat, hard pop. It was distant. From the container yards below, it was followed by two more. Pop, pop. Renzo froze. It was not a gradual change. It was instantaneous. The man holding her vanished, and the Mafia boss took his place. His entire body became rigid, a weapon drawn. He pulled back, only inches, his eyes no longer on her but scanning the darkness below. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He snatched it out, his expression hardening into stone as he read the text. Ironshore! He growled, the name a curse. A shadow detached itself from the stairwell door. Renzo didn't even turn. Secure the building. I want double the perimeter watch, and I want eyes on every container in Sector 4. Now. The shadow vanished. Renzo turned back to Lena. The danger was a palpable aura around him, but his gaze was fixed on her. Intense and unwavering, the promise from the kiss was still there, now overlaid with something darker. We're not finished, he said, his voice a low, rough command. He signaled to his man, who had reappeared. Get her home. Take the south route. Avoid the main drag. Lena stood frozen for a second, wrapped in his coat, her lips tingling, her entire body humming with an unresolved energy. The guard gently touched her elbow, and she allowed herself to be led back to the elevator, her legs unsteady. She glanced back one last time. Renzo was already at the edge of the roof, his phone to his ear, a king surveying his battlefield. The drive home was a silent blur. Lena's mind was a chaotic whirl. She was confused by the kiss, shaken by the raw, grieving man he had revealed, and she was deeply, profoundly afraid. He wasn't just hiding from her ex, he was actively fighting a war, and he stood at the absolute center of it. The summons arrived via a formal email to her hospital inbox Federal Crime Suppression Unit. Requests your cooperation regarding an inquiry. It was clinical, cold, and non-negotiable. Lena spent the morning in a state of controlled panic. She found herself in a gray government-issue interview room, sitting across from a man who introduced himself as Agent Miles Decker. He looked to be in his mid-40s, a brown-skinned man with intelligent, weary eyes and a sharp suit that didn't hide his build. He poured her a cup of water, his movements calm. He was not a bully. He was worse. He was observant. Nurse Alessi, Decker began, his voice even. This is an informal chat about an unreported patient, Mr. Renzo Martelli. Lena kept her expression neutral, the way she did when delivering bad news. I'm not his doctor. I have no professional relationship with him. We know, Decker said, not unkindly. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs. The first was a long lens shot of her and Renzo at the Velvet Anchor, him leaning in, her smiling. The second was from the hospital parking garage, time-stamped just 3 days ago. You've met at least twice. He paid an exorbitant bill for a patient you treated. He's a very generous man. Decker leaned forward, his voice dropping. Or, he's a very smart one. He's the head of the Meridian outfit. Doctor, they control the docks, and men like him don't do favors. They invest. He's using you. Lena looked at the photos, then back at Decker. He wanted to thank me for the patient's care. That was the first meeting. The second time, he paid the bill. It was a brief conversation. It was a partial truth, brittle and thin. Decker sighed, as if disappointed. You're smarter than that, doctor, and I think you know you're in over your head. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to offer you a way out. Renzo Martelli is moving high-value illicit goods through the port. We want to know what and when. You help us, and we can make sure your family is protected. My family. Lena's blood ran cold. Your brother, Noah Park, attends Astiara University. Correct on academic probation for a computer ethics violation. Decker tapped the folder. It would be a shame if the university board decided to review his case and make an example of him. Lena left the federal building an hour later, her legs shaking. Decker's veiled threat hung in the air. But she wasn't just scared, she was furious. That evening, Renzo summoned her again, not to the roof, but to the private lounge. The mood was different. The warmth from the rooftop kiss was gone, replaced by a tense, analytical quiet. "I found out who was watching us at the Velvet Anchor," he said, skipping any greeting. He was looking out the window, not at her. "The man I was meeting, my partner from the shipping firm. He was an FCSU informant. He's been feeding them information for 6 months." He turned to face her. His eyes were unreadable, but not accusatory. "The agent who ran him, a man named Decker, has been building a case. They photographed us that night. They photographed you at the hospital." He paused, studying her face. "You were supposed to meet me that night, but canceled. Was that them? Did they stop you?" "No," Lena said, her voice small. I was afraid." He nodded slowly, seeming to accept that. "They contacted you today, didn't they?" She couldn't hide the flicker of shock in her eyes. How did you know?" "Because it's what I would do." He stepped closer, but didn't touch her. "They threatened you. They threatened Noah." It wasn't a question. She nodded, biting her lip. "Listen to me, Lena," he said, his voice firm but low, pulling her in. "I am not going to tell you they're wrong about me, but they are not the good men they pretend to be. If they contact you again, whatever they say, whatever they offer, you come and you tell me. You tell me everything. I will not let them touch your family. I give you my word." The promise was a heavy weight. Lena was trapped. Decker was offering to clear Noah's name, to remove the threat that had been hanging over their family. But Renzo had shown her his hidden clinic. He was doing the work she believed in, catching the people the system let fall. He was saving lives, even if his methods were illegal. The following day, the choice was ripped from her. Noah called, his voice tight with panic. "Lena, what is going on? I just got an email. The University Ethics Board, they're reopening my case. They're talking about expulsion." Decker had kept his promise. He was squeezing her weak point, and he was squeezing it hard. She felt a surge of cold rage. They thought they could manipulate her, use her brother as leverage. She made a decision. It was not for FCSU, and it was not for Renzo. It was for herself. She called Decker. "I'll help," she said, her voice steady. "If you see any movement, any talk of weapons or medical supplies at the port, I'll let you know. But first, you call off your dogs. You leave my brother alone." Decker agreed, a note of satisfaction in his voice. An hour later, she was standing in Renzo's office. "Decker contacted me," she said, meeting his intense gaze. "He wants information on weapons or high-value medical shipments. He's squeezing Noah." Renzo watched her, his expression calculating. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I would help," Lena said. Renzo's stillness was more terrifying than any rage. "You're working for them." "No," she said, stepping closer, fueled by her anger. "I'm working for me. I told him I would report any weapons shipments I hear about. So, here I am, reporting to you, if you're planning on moving anything." Not while they're watching me. They think I'm their informant, but they're wrong." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Renzo's face. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. He hadn't expected this. He had expected her to be a victim, someone to be protected or managed. He had not expected a partner. "You're playing them," he said, a new respect in his voice. "We're playing them," she corrected. "He'll be watching me, which means he's watching you. But I'm the one who gets to tell him what I see, and you're the one who makes sure there's nothing to see." The tension that had filled the room didn't disappear, but it changed. It was no longer suspicion. It was the crackling energy of a shared, high-stakes secret. The attraction that had begun with a glance and solidified with a kiss now had a foundation. It was no longer just about two people. It was about them against a system that was trying to crush them both. Renzo reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was light, but it was a seal. They were in this together. He knew she was compromised. Decker's pressure on Noah meant the FCSU would not let her go, and now that his rivals knew Renzo was seen with her, she was a liability, or worse, a target. He picked her up himself, not in the black sedan, but in an unassuming dark gray coupe. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tight, the stress of the last few days visible in the tense set of her shoulders. "Somewhere we can talk," he said, turning onto the highway that led out of the city. "Somewhere no one is listening." The drive lasted nearly 2 hours, heading south along the coast until the city lights were just a faint, dirty glow in their rearview mirror. He took a final turn onto an unmarked, unpaved road that wound through a thicket of coastal pines. They emerged onto a rocky bluff overlooking the black, churning ocean. Seaward Point. It was the absolute edge of Port Dominion, a wild and empty place. A house, more of a modern cabin, was built into the rock, its dark wood and glass walls facing the sea. He parked, and as he cut the engine, the only sound was the roar of the surf crashing on the rocks below. He led her inside. The cabin was the antithesis of his city persona, where the lounge was dark velvet and cold metal. This was warm cedar, worn leather and soft, golden light. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room. "You're hungry," he said. It was a statement, not a question. Lena watched, baffled, as he walked into the kitchen, rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, and began to cook. He moved with a practiced, economical grace, pulling fresh pasta, shrimp, garlic, and white wine from a well-stocked refrigerator. He didn't speak as he worked, and the familiar, comforting sounds of a meal being prepared slowly unwound the tension in her chest. He made a simple, fragrant seafood pasta and poured them both a glass of wine. They ate sitting on a thick rug in front of the fireplace, the wind howling outside. The man beside her, mincing garlic and tossing pasta, felt impossibly different from the cold authority who commanded men at the docks. "Decker thinks he knows my business," Renzo said quietly, staring into the flames. "He thinks this is about money. He's wrong." Lena waited, holding her breath. "My father," Renzo continued, his voice low, "he wasn't a boss. He was a foreman on Pier 12. He ran the stevedores, the family that ran the docks before me. They wanted to move narcotics through his manifests. My father wouldn't do it. He was a proud man. He told them no." Renzo paused, his glass halfway to his lips. "They shot him, right in front of his crew, as an example." "Oh, Renzo," she whispered. "I didn't inherit an empire. Lena, I inherited a war. I built the Meridian outfit from the men who were loyal to my father. I took power because I will never, ever be helpless again. And I will not let the people I care about be made examples of." His confession, so raw and unguarded, settled in the space between them. It was the missing piece, the explanation for the clinic, for his cold control, for the violence that shadowed him. He was still a criminal, but for the first time, she understood the why. She moved closer, sitting on her knees beside him. His sleeve was rolled up and high on his shoulder. She saw a pale, silver line against his olive skin, a scar, acting on impulse. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the raised tissue. And this, his eyes locked on her hand, his expression unreadable, from trusting the wrong person. The air in the cabin shifted, becoming thick and electric. The space between them, measured in inches, felt enormous and infinitesimal. He set his wine glass down. His hand came up, not to her face but to her wrist, his fingers curling around it, holding her hand against his scar. He turned his head, his gaze dropping to her mouth. He pulled her. It was not a request. He pulled her into his lap, his other arm wrapping around her back, crushing her against his chest. His mouth claimed hers. It was not the slow, questioning kiss from the rooftop. This was a drowning. It was deep and certain, fueled by the night's confessions and a week of unresolved tension. It was the taste of wine, salt, and him. Lena's hands, freed from his grip, moved to his chest, fisting in the material of his shirt. Her heart hammered against his, a frantic, shared rhythm. She kissed him back, meeting his desperate energy with her own, her body melting into his. He broke the kiss, only to breathe, his forehead resting against hers. His hand slid from her back, up her side, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin just below her ribs. She shivered, her breath catching. His fingers found the top button of her blouse. He stopped. His entire body went still. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, his own turbulent and dark. "Lena," he whispered, his voice rough. "Are you sure?" It was the one question that mattered. It was the anchor of consent in a sea of chaos. This man was dangerous. His life was a storm. But in this moment, he was giving her the choice. She looked straight into his eyes, her own fear and desire warring, and she nodded once. A single, definite motion. That was all he needed. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her the few feet to the wide leather sofa that faced the wall of windows. The storm had broken, and moonlight flooded the room, painting the sea in shades of silver and black. He laid her down on the cushions, following her, his body a warm, heavy weight covering hers. He didn't rip her clothes. He unfastened her blouse slowly, one button at a time, his knuckles grazing her skin. He kissed the skin he revealed. He kissed her throat, her collarbone, the hollow just above her rapidly beating heart. His touch was reverent, almost worshipful. Her hands, trembling slightly, went to the buttons of his shirt, needing to feel his skin against hers. When she finally pushed the fabric aside, she laid her palms flat against his chest. His skin was hot, his muscles hard and defined. She felt the steady thump of his heart beneath her hand. He captured her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones, and kissed her again, long and slow, as if he had all the time in the world. His hand slid from her waist, molding to her hip, holding her securely. This was not a frantic, hurried act. It was an exploration. It was the brush of skin, the tangle of limbs, the whisper of breath, in his arms, wrapped on the sofa with the moonlit sea as their only witness. Lena felt something she hadn't realized she was missing. She felt safe. She felt cherished. She felt, for a fleeting, perfect moment, like she belonged. He gathered her close, his lips moving to her neck, and the night, the sea, and the darkness outside the window finally closed in, swallowing them both. The sound was a violation, a shrill, digital ringing. Renzo was awake before the second ring, moving off her in one fluid, terrifyingly fast motion. The man who had held her with such tenderness was gone. The boss was back. He snatched a ringing satellite phone from the pocket of his discarded jacket. "What?" he barked. He listened, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. "Where how many?" He was already pulling on his shirt, his movements economical and precise. "Lock it down. I'm 40 minutes out." He ended the call and looked at Lena, who was pulling a throw blanket around her, the cold of the room suddenly apparent. "The Iron Shore crew," he said, his voice flat and deadly. "They knew I'd left the city. They just hit my main warehouse." He was strapping a holster to his ankle, a weapon she hadn't seen him bring in. Two men, his guards who had been staying in a separate wing, appeared silently at the door. "Marco? Leo. You stay with her. No one gets in or out until I send my car for you." "Understand?" The men nodded once. Renzo strode to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. He turned back, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. The passion from moments ago was still there, but it was now forged into something hard and possessive. "You're not just my guest anymore. Lena, you're not just a doctor I know." His voice was low, leaving no room for argument. "They will find out about you. They will see you as my weakness. From now on, they will come for you." He didn't wait for her to reply. The door shut with a heavy, final thud, leaving Lena alone in the moonlight, the scent of him on her skin, and the chilling realization that she had just chosen a side. She had given him her body, and in his world, that meant she had just given him her life. The return to the city was jarring. After the raw intensity of Seaward Point, the mundane reality of her job felt like a costume she no longer knew how to wear. The reprieve, however, was short-lived. The email was waiting for her when she arrived for her shift, mandatory meeting human resources. The head of HR, a woman named Miss Davies with a polite, fixed smile, did not waste time. Nurse Alessi, it has come to the hospital board's attention that you are in a personal association with an individual currently under a significant federal investigation. Lena's blood ran cold. My personal life has no bearing on my professional conduct. We believe it does, Miss Davies said, her smile never wavering. Agent Decker of the FCSU was kind enough to inform us that your association complicates matters for the hospital's federal funding. We cannot have our staff compromised. They had done it. Decker had poisoned the well, isolating her from the very life she had fought to build. Therefore, Miss Davies continued, the board strongly suggests you take an immediate, indefinite, unpaid leave of absence, pending the outcome of their investigation. It's for your own protection, of course. Unpaid leave. They were cutting her off, severing her income, pushing her out with a sterile, corporate smile. She walked out of the office in a daze, her ID badge suddenly feeling like a heavy, useless piece of plastic. She called Renzo from her car, her voice shaking with quiet fury. They did it. The hospital. Decker told them about us. They put me on unpaid leave. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. Good. You're done with them. What are you talking about? I'm not... Renzo, that's my entire career. It was your job. Lena, it wasn't your career. Your career is saving lives. The hospital is just a building. He paused. I'm offering you a new position. Full-time medical supervisor for the Harbor Line Wellness Program. You will have full autonomy. You will answer to no one but me. You will build it from a clinic into the real hospital that neighborhood deserves. And your salary will be double what those cowards were paying you. Lena closed her eyes. It was a lifeline. It was a cage. To accept meant stepping fully out of the legitimate world and into his shadow. It was an irreversible decision, a final branding. But she thought of her mother, fading away in a crowded ward because they could not afford the specialists. She thought of the dock worker whose hand was saved, the immigrant girl with pneumonia. The legitimate system had failed them, and it had just failed her. Yes, she said, her voice firm. I accept. The pressure, however, did not stop. It merely shifted. 2 days later, Noah called her, his voice cracking with a panic she hadn't heard since he was a teenager. They found me, Lena, at the library. A man, not Decker, but one of his agents. He said they're reopening my hacking case. He said they have new evidence and that the university is prepared to expel me and press charges. He was breathing hard. He said it all goes away if you stop seeing Renzo Martelli. Lena, what is going on? They were done threatening her. They were now actively threatening her family. She hung up, her hand steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. She was no longer a victim caught between two forces. She was a player. She called Agent Decker. You went after my brother, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. We're just following up on an old file. Doctor, these things take time. Decker's voice was slick. You stop. Now, you call off your men and you bury that file, or you will get nothing from me. Ever. That's a bold move, considering your new employer, he countered. I hear things, Lena said, walking the tightrope. For example, I hear there's a large shipment of counterfeit antibiotics moving through Sector 6 tomorrow night, a huge loss for the pharmaceutical companies you're supposed to protect. She gave him the container number and the time. It was real information. It was also information Renzo had given her that morning, a shipment run by a disloyal crew member that he was already planning to intercept and destroy. It was the perfect sacrifice. Decker paused. I appreciate the tip. Doctor, I'll see what I can do about your brother's situation. She was playing both sides, feeding the FCSU just enough to keep them off Noah, while protecting everything that mattered to Renzo. She did not have to confess. When she saw Renzo that night at the clinic, which was already expanding under her new direction, he simply looked at her. Decker's team was very active in Sector 6 tonight, he commented, his hands in his pockets. They got the counterfeit drugs, Lena said, meeting his gaze. They did. He studied her, a flicker of something she couldn't name pride, perhaps in his eyes. His men had been watching Decker. He knew she had been the one to make the call. He knew she was walking a razor's edge to protect her brother, and he was not angry. You did well, he said, but do not make a habit of it. I will handle Decker. He didn't punish her. He didn't yell or threaten. He simply accepted her move and recalibrated. He was choosing her, even with the complications she brought. This choice, however, was not made in a vacuum. In the back room of a private social club, Renzo's capos the older. Traditional advisors who had served his father were less understanding. She's a liability, Renzo, said Vitale, his oldest advisor. She talks to the feds. You put her in charge of the clinic. You take her to Seaward Point. You are letting this nurse, make you soft. She is under my protection, Renzo said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And she is smarter than any of you are giving her credit for. She is an asset. The subject is closed. The capos fell silent, but their disapproval was a heavy, suffocating presence in the room. Renzo's focus on Lena was distracting him, making him shield a weakness, and across the city, his enemies could smell it. The rumor started quietly. A whisper in the bars and loading bays controlled by the Ironshore crew. It was a simple, brutal calculation. Renzo Martelli, the untouchable boss of the docks, the man who had rebuilt his father's empire from ash, finally had something to lose. The rumor was simple. Grab the girl and the king kneels. The romance was no longer a secret or a risk. It was a target. And everyone was taking aim. The idea was Lena's. It was desperate, dangerous, and hinged entirely on her ability to lie to everyone. She proposed it to Renzo in the secure office above the clinic, her voice low and steady. They all think I'm your weakness, she said, pacing. FCSU, your rivals, even your own men. So let's give them what they want. Let's make them think you're getting rid of your weakness. Renzo watched her, his expression unreadable. A public fight. A public, humiliating fight, she corrected. You break up with me. You storm out. You make a scene. Decker will think his pressure worked, that I've come to my senses. The Ironshore crew will think I'm unprotected, no longer under your umbrella. It's the only way to get them to move. He hated it. She could see the violent refusal in his jaw, but he also saw the cold, strategic brilliance. Bayline 33, he said, naming a new, glass-walled seafood restaurant that was always full of the city's elite. Tonight, 8 o'clock. The restaurant was loud, all clinking glasses and bright conversations. They were seated at a prime table. Renzo had been cold since they arrived, playing his part. The argument started, as planned, over a perceived slight. You don't tell me where you're going. Lena, you act like this is a game, he said, his voice just loud enough for the neighboring tables to go quiet. A game. You're the one who lives in the shadows. Renzo, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being afraid, she shot back, her voice rising. Then maybe you should go back to your old life, he said, his voice dropping to a cold, venomous level. The one where you were safe and unimportant. The words struck her, harder than she expected. This was an act, but the words felt real, drawing on all her deepest insecurities. He saw the shift in her eyes, the genuine pain. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. The entire restaurant fell silent. I'm done, he said, throwing his napkin on the table. We're done. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone at the table, the target of every whispering diner. Lena put her head in her hands, and the tears that came were entirely, agonizingly real. Agent Decker contacted her the very next morning, his voice oozing false sympathy. Nurse Alessi, I heard about what happened last night. I'm sorry, but it seems you've finally woken up. You made the smart choice. He just left me there, she whispered into the phone, playing the part of the jilted victim. He's a user. Lena, I told you, Now, let's get your brother's file permanently closed. I just need one thing. The schedule for the Meridian Outfits container ships, specifically the Poseidon. It's arriving on Wednesday. I don't know if I can get that." She lied. "Find a way," Decker said, the sympathy gone. "Prove you're really done with him." Lena agreed. An hour later, she was at the Harbor Line clinic. She found a patient she had treated weeks ago, a young woman whose son she had helped. She wrote a prescription, and on the back, in the coded medical shorthand she and Renzo had established, she wrote FCSU, Poseidon, Wednesday, recommend complete bed rest. The woman delivered the note to Renzo's men. That evening, Renzo gave his orders. The high-value cargo scheduled for the Poseidon was rerouted onto a fleet of unassuming, long-haul trucks set to leave at staggered times over the next 48 hours. The Poseidon would sail on Wednesday, as scheduled, but its containers would be filled with nothing but bulk cement and decoy medical supplies. He would let FCSU have their win, and in doing so, he would see which of his own capos, the only ones who knew the Poseidon's original manifest, was leaking information. But the Ironshore crew was not watching the ships, they were watching Lena. Their target was not the main clinic at the docks, which was now known as Renzo's territory. It was the new suburban outreach clinic Lena had established in a community center, a place she visited twice a week. They saw the public fight. They saw Renzo's guards, who usually shadowed her car, reduced to a single vehicle parked a block away. They assumed the boss had pulled his protection from the ex-girlfriend. The attack happened on a Thursday during a planned building-wide fire drill. The alarms blared, and staff and patients began filing out into the parking lot, a sea of confused, calm faces. No one was panicking. In the mild, orderly chaos, Lena was directing a nurse when two men, dressed in the uniforms of a fire inspection company, grabbed her. She didn't even have time to scream. A hand clamped over her mouth, another arm like a steel band around her waist. She was half dragged, half carried to a black van waiting in a fire lane. People saw it, but the men moved with such purpose, and the alarm was so loud that everyone assumed she was part of the drill, a simulated victim. The doors slammed, the van sped off, its tires screeching. Just as the last of the building's occupants cleared the exits, Renzo's guards, the single car, had been lax. They'd heard the boss and the doctor had a massive fight. The immediate threat seemed to have passed. They were sitting back, observing. Not anticipating a full-scale abduction in broad daylight, they saw the van pull away too late. The call reached Renzo in the middle of a meeting with his capos, the very men he suspected of betrayal. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. His face, usually an impassive mask, went white. He stood up, his eyes locking on his underboss. "Say that again." The underboss, on speakerphone, was frantic. "They took her, boss, from the suburban clinic, a black van, the fire drill. We lost her. Vitale, the old guard capo, made a mistake." He scoffed. "It is done. The weakness is gone. Let them have her. She was—" Renzo's roar was not human. He grabbed the heavy, solid oak meeting table and flipped it. Glass, water pitchers, and phones exploded across the room. The capos scrambled back, stunned into silence. Renzo stood breathing heavily, his eyes blazing with a feral rage none of them had ever witnessed. "She is not a weakness," he snarled, his voice a low, vibrating threat. "She is mine." He stalked over to Vitale, grabbing the front of the older man's suit. "Anyone who says to leave her, anyone who even thinks it, you are out of this organization. You are out of this city, or you are in the ground. Do you understand me?" He threw the man back into his chair. He was no longer the cold strategist. He was a man hollowed out by pure fear and rage. He turned to his head of security. "Find her. Use everyone. I don't care who sees. I don't care who gets hurt." He knew, with a sickening certainty, what this was. The Ironshore crew had her, and they, and Agent Decker, would all be waiting for him to come and get her. They were all waiting for the king to finally step into the trap. The air was thick with the smells of old iron, diesel fuel, and stagnant salt water. Lena's wrists were raw, bound tight behind her to a steel support beam. She was in an abandoned container warehouse at Dry Dock 17, the heart of Iron Shore territory. The floor was gritty with rust and dirt. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was not physically imposing, but his eyes were sharp and devoid of warmth. Gabe Morales, he introduced himself, as if they were at a business lunch. "Sorry about the accommodations, doctor." "What do you want?" Lena asked, her voice steady. She refused to give him the satisfaction of her fear. "Simple," he said, pulling up a rusted metal stool. "Renzo Martelli runs the most profitable protection routes on this coast. He has a list. Who pays? How much and when? I want that list. A very eager syndicate on the West Coast is willing to pay a fortune for it, and I believe he'll trade it for you." Lena's mind was working, calculating. She focused on her medical training. Control the breathing. Slow, deep breaths to keep the panic from clouding her judgment. She flexed her fingers against the zip-tie bindings, testing their tension, forcing blood to circulate. She was not a damsel. She was a doctor. She began to observe. 2 men at the main door, one patrolling the gantry above, Gabe himself. She noted the patrol's timing. He passed her position every 6 minutes. Gabe pulled out a smartphone. "Renzo is a hard man to reach, but I think this will get his attention." He aimed the camera at her, starting a private live stream. He sent the link to a number he clearly had ready, "Just so he knows you're unharmed, for now." He let the camera linger on her face, on the tight bindings, then he cut the feed. "He has until midnight. He brings the list to Pier 9, or you become a permanent part of this dock's foundation." In Renzo's war room, the atmosphere was explosive. The image of Lena tied to a beam had just vanished from the monitor. "It is a trap," Vitali insisted in, his voice heavy. "This is Morales' territory, and the FCSU is crawling all over it. He sacrifices the girl, lets Decker and Morales tear each other apart. We consolidate. It is the smart move." Renzo, who had been staring at the blank screen, slowly turned his head. His voice was a flat, cold whisper that cut through the smoke in the room. "If we abandon her, our word is worthless. No one on these docks will pay us for protection. They know we won't honor. Our entire operation is built on our word." He looked at every man in the room. "We are not abandoning her." He was framing it as business, but the violent rage coiling in his shoulders told the real story. This was not a calculation. It was an execution order. The phone in Gabe's hand rang. He looked surprised. He answered it, listened, and then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "He wants to talk to you." Gabe pressed the phone to Lena's ear. "Lena." Her name. Just her name, in his deep, warm voice, and a wave of relief so strong it almost buckled her knees. All the cold calculation, all the practiced calm, shattered in that single second. "Renzo," she breathed. "I am coming," he said. The warmth was gone, replaced by a deadly, focused calm. It was a promise. "Keep your head down. Stay alive." He paused, and his voice dropped even lower. A vow of pure annihilation meant only for her. "Don't make me choose the crueler way." The line clicked dead, miles away. In a mobile FCSU command van, an analyst looked up from his console. "Sir, I've got it. We intercepted the call. Morales is holding her at Dry Dock 17. Renzo just confirmed he's going in. The meet is for midnight." Agent Decker looked at the tactical map. "He's walking right into it, the 2 biggest players in one place. He's that stupid over this woman." Decker smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. "Do not intercept. Position tactical teams around the perimeter. We'll let Martelli and Morales bleed each other out, and we'll move in to arrest whoever is left standing. Let the trash take itself out." In the warehouse, Lena listened. The background noise of the port, which had been a low hum, was changing. She heard the distant, heavy clang of containers being moved, the groan of cranes. They were preparing. The fight was coming. She had to move. When they had searched her, they had looked for weapons, for a phone. They had not checked her hair. She always, as a force of habit from her residency, kept a single, Long, sturdy metal pin twisted into the tight bun at the back of her head, perfect for pinning back unruly hair during a long procedure. Her hands were numb, but she worked her fingers, twisting her wrists against the beam. It took agonizing minutes. The zip tie was thick plastic, but she wasn't trying to cut it. She was using the metal pin's point to find the locking mechanism, the small ratchet inside the tie's head. She pushed, probing, her fingers cramping. It slipped. She tried again. She heard a guard cough. His footsteps approaching. She froze. He passed by without looking at her. She jammed the pin in hard. There was a tiny click. The plastic tie loosened. She didn't pull her hands free, not yet. She waited, breathing, until the guard passed again on his next rotation. When he was gone, she slipped her hands free. She didn't run for the door. That was a death sentence. Instead, she slipped deeper into the warehouse, into the maze of stacked unlit containers. She found what she was looking for, a row of refrigerated units, their cooling fans humming quietly, providing a wall of solid steel. She wedged herself in the narrow, cold gap between two of them. She was hidden, but she wasn't finished. On the wall was a standard-issue dock workers' first aid station. She grabbed it, pulling it into the shadows with her. She clicked it open. Gauze, antiseptic wipes, pressure bandages, suture tape. She laid the supplies out on her lap in the dark, organizing them by feel. She was cold. She was terrified. But she was ready. She knew he was coming, and she knew, with the certainty of a doctor who has seen too much, that he would be shot. She would be ready. The clock somewhere chimed, the sound carrying on the cold, salty air. It was almost midnight. A cold rain was falling, slicking the pavement of the docks. It was just past midnight. The headlights of Renzo's sedans were lost in the mix of legitimate delivery trucks making late-night runs. He stepped out of his car, his long coat concealing the tactical vest beneath. He carried a legal firearm, holstered and hidden. The exchange was never meant to happen. Gabe Morales stepped into the light of a single, bare bulb, shoving Lena ahead of him. The list. Martelli. Now. Renzo held up a briefcase. Let her go first. Morales laughed, a harsh, grating sound. But before he could answer, a shot rang out from the gantry above. It was an Ironshore sniper, aiming not at Renzo, but at the main floodlights. The dock plunged into darkness. Chaos erupted, horns blared as headlights snapped on, blinding everyone. Gunfire echoed, flat and sharp, bouncing off the steel walls of the containers. Renzo moved through the chaos, ignoring the men firing at him, his focus only on the shadow he'd last seen as Lena. He found her scrambling behind a stack of pallets. Morales was there, his gun raised, aiming not at Renzo, but at her. If I can't have the list, you can't have her, he screamed. Renzo didn't hesitate. He lunged, shoving Lena hard toward the ground. A flat thud echoed, different from the others. Renzo grunted, a sharp intake of breath as the bullet slammed into his shoulder, the force spinning him around. "Renzo!" Lena screamed. Adrenaline surged, eclipsing her fear. She grabbed his arm, pulling him with surprising strength toward the narrow gap between two refrigerated containers. She shoved him into the darkness and slid the heavy door almost closed, leaving only a crack. It was a steel box, shielding them. Gunfire hammered against the outside, sparking off the metal. "The light!" she ordered, her voice shaking but commanding. He fumbled for the small penlight in his coat, the one he carried for reading manifests. She clicked it on. His face was pale, his teeth gritted against the pain. "It's just the shoulder," he gasped. "It's soft tissue." "Shut up," she commanded, ripping open his expensive shirt and the vest beneath. Her hands were trembling, but her movements were economical, precise. She had the first aid kit, the one she had grabbed. She packed the entry wound hard with gauze. He hissed, his entire body tensing, but his eyes never left her face, watching her with a raw, desperate intensity even as he bled. Outside, the chaos shifted. New sirens, louder. Blue and red lights flashed, cutting through the rain. "FCSU, drop your weapons." Hands in the air. Agent Decker's voice was on a loudspeaker. The tactical team swept in, catching the Ironshore crew between two fires. It was a rout. Decker stood by his command van, watching the firefight. "Sir, we have 2 subjects escaping through the south gate," an agent reported, pointing to a grainy monitor. Decker looked, seeing a familiar silhouette half carrying a larger man toward a maintenance area. He lowered his binoculars. "Let them go," he said. "The perimeter must have missed them." He owed her that much. Renzo leaned heavily on Lena as they reached an old, battered pickup truck hidden in an alcove. He slid into the passenger seat, his left arm useless. "Keys," he grunted. They were under the visor. Lena got in, the engine roaring to life. She slammed the truck into gear and sped out of the docks, fishtailing on the wet pavement just as the FCSU blockade sealed the main entrance. They drove in silence, the city fading, the rain washing the blood from the windshield. They arrived at the Seaward Point cabin just as a bruised, gray dawn broke over the ocean. Inside the warm cabin, the adrenaline finally ebbed, leaving bone, deep exhaustion and pain. Lena pushed Renzo onto the sofa. "Take off the shirt, all of it." This time, she wasn't frantic. She had hot water, clean bandages, and antiseptic. She meticulously cleaned the wound, her touch gentle but firm. "You're an idiot," she whispered, her voice thick as she taped the final bandage. "You walked right into it. You could have been killed." He caught her hand, his good one, and pulled her down. His eyes were clear, the pain making him look startlingly human. "I had everything," he said, his voice rough. "The docks, the money, the respect. I had everything except you." She looked at him, her anger dissolving into something overwhelming. She leaned in, and this kiss was not about passion or survival. It was a confirmation. It was slow, deep, and tasted of salt and relief. She was shaking, the exhaustion of the night finally hitting her. He pulled her against his uninjured side, wrapping his arm around her, holding her tightly. She buried her face in his neck. He stroked her hair, his lips brushing her temple. "It's over," he murmured. "I'm upgrading your security, a personal detail. They will never touch you again." They didn't move, just held each other as the sun rose, the warmth of the cabin chasing away the storm. The Meridian outfit accepted Lena. The boss had walked into a trap for her, taking a bullet, in their world. That was a bond stronger than any contract. The Harborline Wellness Program received a massive, anonymous donation, and the paperwork was filed to put Dr. Lena Alessi as its director, legitimizing her place in his world. A week later, the port was calm. Renzo took her not to the cabin, not to the lounge, but to the top floor of the Mariner Tower, a private penthouse he owned, overlooking the entire harbor. The city lights glittered below them like a captured constellation. He pressed a heavy, old-fashioned key into her palm. "My safe house. No one knows about this place." He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, looking out the window. "That first night," he said, his voice quiet, "at the Velvet Anchor, when that man grabbed you, I was going to look away. It wasn't my business." Lena turned in his arms to face him. "But you didn't cry," he continued, his eyes tracing her features. "You sat up straight, you fixed your dress, and you looked him in the eye. I knew, right then, that I was done." He smiled, a small, genuine smile. "This time, Lena, I'm not looking away." Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.